Advisory. Please remember, the information provided is for educational purposes only and is not legal advice. If you need legal assistance, we recommend contacting an attorney. If you do not have access to one and want help, please reach out to Washington Law Help, a trusted resource for legal guidance at washingtonlawhelp.org. Washingtonlawhelp.org.
Welcome to your deep dive. Have you ever found yourself scrolling through those endless rental listings and you just kind of start to wonder, like, is this place gonna, I don't know, fall apart around me?
Yeah,
Yeah, we've all been there.
it's a common fear.
This time, we are tackling rental safety head on.
Oh, wow.
Specifically in Lakewood, Washington.
Okay.
They've got this whole rental housing safety program, and, we're going beyond the surface to see if it's actually as safe as it sounds.
Interesting.
We're talking inspections, exemptions, and what it all means for you, the renter.
Well, and what's really interesting about Lakewood's approach is it's not just about reacting to complaints that, might come up after a renter's already moved in. They're trying to get ahead of the game with these proactive inspections, ensuring like a baseline level of safety for everyone.
Okay, so less, please fix my leaky faucet, and more, let's make sure this place is livable from the get-go. I like the sound of that. But proactive inspections of what exactly? What are they looking for?
You can almost think of it like, you know how you get a health checkup?
Right.
It's like that, but for your apartment building. So they're checking the big stuff. Structural integrity is a big one.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want sagging ceilings or cracks in the foundation that kind of scream, get out now.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely something I would want to know before I signed a lease. What else?
Weather exposure is another big one.
Really?
They're checking for proper insulation, making sure your windows are sealed properly, checking the roof, basically making sure you're not battling the elements every time, like, the seasons change.
Oh, tell me about it. I once lived in a place where the windows were so drafty I could practically feel the wind whistling past my ears. Not fun.
And that's exactly what this program aims to prevent.
Yeah.
They're also checking those essential safety features we often just, take for granted. Things like working smoke and carbon monoxide detectors.
Yeah, because a detector that doesn't detect is about as useful as a chocolate teapot, right?
You got it. It's all about that peace of mind. And here's where it gets interesting. Lakewood actually gives property owners a choice. They can either go with a city inspector, or they can pick from a list of qualified private inspectors.
Wait, really? I didn't realize cities could do that, so it's not just a one-size-fits-all situation?
Yeah, it's kind of surprising. This flexibility actually comes from a Washington Supreme Court ruling back in 2007, City of Pasco v. Shaw. And it essentially gave cities a little more, I guess, leeway in how they could manage these rental inspections, which kind of opened the door for this, hybrid approach.
Wow, I did not know there was a whole legal backstory to this. So it's not just Lakewood making things up as they go along. There's like a precedent for this. But hold on a second. All this talk about inspections and regulations, it's great and all, but what's in it for the renters? I mean, like, what's the benefit for the people actually living in these places?
Yeah, that's the key question, right?
Right.
Well, for starters, it shifts the responsibility of making sure these basic safety standards are met. It takes it away from just the renter having to deal with it. You're not just relying on your landlord to address these things.
Yeah.
There's a whole program designed to catch these issues, hopefully, before they even become major headaches. And, those inspection checklists we were talking about,
Yeah.
renters actually benefit from those too.
Okay, how so? Besides just knowing that someone's, making sure there are no cracks in the foundation.
All right, so let's say you move into a new place, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you see this, official-looking document proudly displayed. That's the certificate of compliance. And what that means is that property has passed its inspection. It meets Lakewood's safety standards.
So it's like a green light, like a signal that, okay, this place is good to go.
Exactly. But it's more than just a piece of paper, right?
Mm-hmm.
That certificate actually gives renters a little bit of leverage. So if problems come up later on that, really should have been caught during that inspection, tenants can point to that certificate and say, hey, this wasn't supposed to happen.
That's a really good point. It kind of adds a layer of accountability, for the landlord, but also for that inspection process itself. But let's face it, I mean, no system is perfect. What happens when things go wrong? What about like those what if scenarios, the kind of stuff that keeps renters up at night?
I'm sure we've all been there.
Yeah.
Let's dive into a couple of those what ifs.
Yeah.
So one common concern is, what if they've scheduled my inspection, but I'm, out of town? Or what if I just don't really want a stranger in my place, looking around my stuff?
Yeah, I can see how that would be a dilemma for people. I mean, it's your home, even if you are renting.
Right. And while the program definitely stresses that tenants need to cooperate, it's not about forcing people to just open up their homes if they, really don't want to. Tenants, they can reschedule.
Okay.
They just have to give proper notice. But, and this is important, if a tenant repeatedly denies access to their place without, a good reason,
Yeah.
it can actually lead to penalties.
Interesting. So it's like this balancing act. They want to make sure these inspections happen, but also respect the fact that it is, the tenant's home.
Okay, here's another one. What if a landlord just, completely ignores the program? They never even registered their property in the first place.
That's when it gets a little more serious.
Yeah.
Unregistered rentals, that's a big no-no in Lakewood. We're talking some pretty hefty fines for landlords who are out there trying to skirt the system. But here's the good news, especially for renters. You have every right to report a property that you think might not be registered.
So it's not just a matter of, hoping for the best or, hearing whispers from past tenants or whatever. There's actually a way to, officially report these things.
Exactly. It's all about, that saying knowledge is power, especially in these kinds of situations. Now, let's get to those exemptions.
Yeah, you were talking about how Lakewood's program isn't one size fits all.
Right, right.
I'm curious about that. So it turns out there are a few interesting exceptions to that rule of having to register and get your property inspected. Like, for example, let's say you're living with family.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of those exceptions. So if you're a homeowner and you're renting to your immediate family, you don't have to register with the program.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, family ties. What else?
New construction is another one.
Really?
Brand new rentals, they're actually exempt for the first 4 years,
Mm-hmm.
as long as there aren't any, glaring code violations.
So if I'm moving into a new building, fresh off the market, chances are it's already been through a bunch of inspections just as part of that initial construction process.
Exactly. It's kind of Lakewood saying, look, we trust that these new buildings are up to code, at least for the time being. But here's where the exemptions get a little interesting. Condos and townhouses.
Okay.
So if one single entity owns the entire complex, they're exempt.
Wait, really? Why would that be?
Okay, so think about it this way. If, let's say, a company owns that entire condo building, they're the ones responsible for the upkeep of all those units.
Right.
And all the common areas and everything. So they've got a vested interest in making sure everything's up to par.
Right. They're not just going to let their own investment fall apart.
Exactly. But here's the catch. If it's individuals who own, multiple units within that complex, then those individual units, they would need to be registered.
So it's not even just about, the type of house. It's also about, the ownership kind of structure.
Yeah, it gets a little complex.
It adds another layer of complexity, doesn't it?
It does, for sure. But it highlights that Lakewood is trying to take a more nuanced approach to this whole rental safety thing. They're trying to cover all the bases, but also, acknowledge that not all rental situations are the same.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to wrap your head around. But I gotta say, the more we dig into this whole program, the more I'm kind of seeing just how much thought actually went into it. It's not just about slapping on a Band-Aid and hoping for the best.
Oh, no, not at all.
It's really about building a system that, ideally makes renting in Lakewood safer, more transparent, all of that.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head.
Huh.
It's easy to overlook these hyper-local regulations. You know what I mean?
Right.
We get caught up in our day-to-day, but the reality is this stuff, it impacts us all. Whether we're renters ourselves or, landlords or even just neighbors.
So if I'm listening to this right now and thinking, okay, this is all great for Lakewood, but what about, my town? What's the big takeaway here? What's the call to action for our listeners?
I think it comes down to this. Do your research.
Hmm.
Because every city, every town, they handle this whole rental safety thing their own way.
Right.
Some places might have a really comprehensive program. Lakewoods, others, maybe they leave it up to the state regulations. And then some places, honestly, might have very minimal oversight. So yeah, I mean, the key takeaway is to be informed.
So it's not just about assuming that someone else is taking care of it. It's about being proactive, figuring out what's in place, what protections you have, or, and maybe this is even more important, what's missing.
100%. Find out how your city handles things. See if they've got a similar program to Lakewood's. What does it cover?
Yeah.
And, what are your rights? What are your responsibilities as a renter? Because that knowledge, it really is power, especially when we're talking about something as essential as having a safe place to call home.
I love that. Consider this your official, little nudge to go do some digging of your own. Because this deep dive, well, it might be over, but your journey towards being a more informed renter, that's just beginning.
Disclaimer: this audio production was generated by artificial intelligence from input generated by humans. There may be unintentional errors. The errors in this audio are minuscule and do not affect the overall understanding of the City of Lakewood, Washington's website, www.cityoflakewood.us Rental Housing Safety Program, and their implementation of RCW 59.18.125, also known as Inspections by Local Municipalities, Frequency, Number of Rental Properties Inspected, Notice, Appeals, Penalties, of the Residential Landlord-Tenant Act of 1973, RCW 59.18. The errors have been left in for authenticity and transparency. Listeners are encouraged to point out these errors and correct them in the comments section of this video or podcast. This promotes community involvement in an important discussion that directly affects the population of Lakewood, Washington. Thank you.